A tēnā tātou katoa e taune. Ka rau hia kia whakatoro hia nā mihi, i te mea kua mihi ia, nā mihi nui, hohonu, i runga i tō tātou mara. Hono mai pēnei i te takuti matanga kōrero. Maisie, you are amazing. And now what do we do to follow after that performance? We do what we know well and we'll stick with our knitting. Hono kia kōrero hia te wāhi o te kōrero mōhnau mo tēnei tangata me ana mahi I roto i au I roto I te Rohe Pōtae. Ara I roto I a Ngāti Maniapoto I roto I a Ngāti Rereahu. Tai Te Ruki ngā Kahu mau. So I'll look to keep my presentation somewhat short and to talk about those aspects of te kōti. Now, you should know right from the get-go, I am not a ringatu. Nor am I a follower of the God of Ishmael and Abraham. That's not a problem. But I have been a party to conversations with kaumātua and been guided by kaumātua as a very young man. I've seen some things which now come back to be useful after many years. Born in Hamilton. While I'm here too, I better say hello to my beautiful daughter sitting in the audience, Aria Huia, looking lovely. But born in Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, and then as a young child taken off to the great metropolis of Kōrero. You know it. Not many do. And brought up in Kōrero. And brought up amongst people, my father being a very young man working for the railways, and mum being just 1 year older than him, and the two of them going off to make a life and dragging their firstborn with them, me. And it is in that town that things began to happen, as it did for many people who moved to Kōrero. At that time, I runga atu rā mātou nā mea tamariki ki ngā pepeha o taua kāinga. Pū tauaki te maunga, tara wera te awa, tāhi mana te tangata. Wera nā kōrero I te wā e tamariki. But it was also in the company of my father's work friends who are much older than him that I began to gravitate to ngā kaupapa waihotanga I hoa koro mā kuima. And can always remember being at school and hearing the booming voices of tūhoi when they were in town. Ngā whai kōrero a tūhoi, ka rangona, ka haruru pai te takiwā, I ngā reo o tūhoi. And so those were some of the things that captured my imagination. Well, also what captured my imagination were some of the influences that were there at that time. Bill Hunia, Harry Moses, Sam Collier from Ngāti Porou, and especially, there was a couple there, Willie and Puti Coates. I didn't realize Uncle Willie's name was Te Whare Kaihau until after he had passed. We only ever knew him as Uncle Willie. But to be there, he would come and take karakia at school, when it was okay to do that sort of thing, and take classes. And Auntie Puti would make sure that there was a level of moral teaching within North School, where we went to school. And after that, began to hang out a bit with Uncle Willie. Up at the marae, during its building phase there, right in the heart of Kōrero, Te Rautahi. And then afterwards, not liking school that much, trying to find as much time and as much opportunity as possible to head up to the pā. Learning too that teachers are a little bit afraid of marae, and they tend not to go and look for you up there. But spending time at at Rautahi, amongst all those kaumātua who came in from all over, including Kuru Barrett from Ngāti Maniapoto from Waitomo. But spending time with, especially with Willie Coates, and listening and learning about ringatu. Nothing directly taught, more of a process of osmosis. I did go to school. I learned an important word, the osmosis, just naturally sucked it in. Now, was also privileged to have met Monita Delamere, who was the grandfather, Monita and his brother Bill, and their sister Marka Jones, and quite a few others from Te Whai, as my really good friends at school were also from Te Whai. They were all Delameres and Kōpus. And also had the opportunity to meet the people from Pahipoto, from Kokohinau. And it was inside that house, Orua Taupare, that the first real appreciation of the difference of the wairua, of ringatu, of te Kooti, really took a hold. Inside that spooky, gloomy house with all those whakairo, e ngangahui humai ana ki a mātou nā mea tamariki o tau awara. He school camp, he hara ni keirira. But to be sat in there and to feel the mana of those songs, the mana and the wairua of those old people. And mea nau how old people i tau awa, they probably were only in their 40s, some of them. But completely moved and transfixed by that sound, by that feeling, by that smell that occasioned around those koroua, those kuia, those pakeke, when they were in that place and giving of their all to their God through those karakia. Transforming. That's a word that's been used today. I was transformed and transfixed. I just thought to myself, I don't know what that is, but I want some of that. And so I spent the better part of my life looking for that, transforming, going through and doing all sorts of things. And transformed by being with Willie Coates, transformed by, and it's not a long time sitting together with them. You know, aha kua iti he pōnam. Aha kua iti he pōnam. But sitting with them and others. And then going up to Omaio, where Maisie's from, and spending time up there as well with my Delamere friends from school and others, and being transformed and transfixed on the power of prayer. Also been privileged to have met a number of kaumātua from home. I'm, as said, I'm from Ngāti Maniapoto, from Ngāti Unu and Ngāti Kahu. Most people don't know who these people are, but that's all right. We're one of the northernmost tribal groups of Ngāti Maniapoto, residing between the two mountains, Kakepuku and Pirongia, with the Waipā River flowing directly in between. And noted too, before flying in yesterday, Te Atakohu was on top of Pirongia, and I thought this is going to be a good day to fly. We were also bearing a relation of ours, but to see Te Atakohu. For those of you who don't know, Te Atakohu is one of our tupua. She makes her appearance every now and then on top of Pirongia, and you see her fingers and her body moving and weaving its way around the peaks looking for her lover, her tāne, who fell from one of the peaks of Pirongi. Her lover happened to be Te Rohe Pōtae. No re kai a tūhoi, tēnei rā te mihi atu rai, kia koutou. Now, one of my biggest influences was a man called Piripi Ngāwhira Crown. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about him because most of my conversations start with him. This here, some of you will be familiar with. It's from the Te Motu Museum. It's a korowai associated with Te Kooti. It was a gift by Te Kooti to a Pākehā woman in our district who offered him and his people comfort and food. And when he asked of her, "Are you not afraid?" she said, "No." And so he bestowed this korowai upon her to ensure that she would never be molested by anyone. The mantle of his protection, the mantle of the protection of ihoa, was placed on the shoulders of this Pākehā woman, and it's in our exhibition now. And in that way, being cloaked with conversations from my kaumātua, from my koroheke, from home, and in that way too, Te Kooti has also cloaked the king country, has influenced the king country, and we have influenced Te Kooti. I believe most of the tunes sung stem from rangitoto, ranginui within the king country. That's a debate we can have some other time. I'm not going to talk about those things that you can research. If you want to know, there's lots of stuff that's been written. If you want to go there, go and have a look. I want to talk to us about the things that my kaumātua told me, things that we sat around the table and talked about, stuff that we haven't shared before. And at this juncture, I will say this to our kaumātua. He rereke tā tēnei, he rereke tā tēnā. We each have our own story, and mine will be different. You know, what we do know at that particular stage, you know, from 1863 all the way through to 1869, eruptions, corruptions, death, slaughter, blood, smoke, fire, women and children, and men imprisoned, killed, persecuted. To this time, to that period, came help, not only in the form of Te Kooti, but in the form of other prophets, in the form of matakite, in the form of leadership. When times are hard, they rise up. We are not left alone to ourselves. And we had the benefit of all of these things culminating and collecting in the king country. And what we do know is that Te Kooti, as far as our old people were concerned, came twice into the Rohe. The first time he came in, he was invited by King Tāwhiao, and as long as he behaved himself and would take up peace. But that was not the way at that time. According to our old people, he was still looking to, well, I suppose, like at school, at college, when we had our first ever Māori lesson of history, Te Kooti was one of those parts of the history talked about. Our young Mick Prendergast was a teacher at that time, and we began a lesson. I don't think he believed either what he was reading. We were talking about Te Kooti and others. Talked about a rebel, a murderer, and all manner of things terrible. Brave talk in kōrero when the majority of your students are Māori, whose parents, and they also, the children, students, happen to be a part of the Ringatu faith. there was a small walkout. 3 of us. The others were transfixed to their chairs. But 3 of us walked out, it just didn't sit well. This part of the story just didn't ring true because we were listening to another dialogue altogether, another story altogether of someone who is completely different. But what we do know, 1870, whātoro mai a te Kooti ki Te Rohe Maniapoto ki te tokonga Motu. Te kuiti I runga I te tono ki ni tāwhia. Not willing to put down arms at that stage, he went right through to te tāpapa and further afield. Ana ka ngaru mo te tahiwa. Ka ngaru mo te tahiwa. And we should know too that relationships at that stage were strained. You know, when times are hard, everybody had strained relationships. There were strained relationships between the king and te Kooti and everybody else. To consider that someone who has been persecuted by the crown might take up refuge inside your district, that could attract the attention of the crown to you. So all of those types of things were affecting the decision-making. However, te Kooti came through, went out the other side of the district and disappeared for, I believe, 2 years. And came back in 1872. E te kaumāria mā o ngā rā o mei, o tā mai a te Kooti me tāna ope ki arohena. No muri tata iho, ka heke te iwi nei ki orongo mai poho. Ka rekau he tangata. Ka tai ki miringa te kakara. Ka rekau ana he tangata I reira. Ka tai ki pāraharaha. Ka rekau ana he tangata he oeno. Ko te rā karepe. Anake. Kia kōrero hia tēnei wāhanga. And a little earlier was talking to some of our kaumātu, our pakeke over there, when we started getting into it. And I thought I better cut short because I don't want to spill all the beans just yet. So te Kooti's second coming. Te Kooti's second coming into the Rohe Pōtae was again a time filled with rumours of the looming shadow of war itself, and war was on the march. There was all sorts of things going on. Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Rereahu, the great tribes within Te Rohe Pōtae responded with a call to hui e te kuiti to discuss the rumours of Te Kooti's return. To this hui went all able men, women and children, leaving many of our kāinga vacant, or those who stayed at home were those who are unable or unwilling to go. At Pāraharaha, Te Rā Karepe was one of those who was willing to go but couldn't. He was too old and thought it better to stay at home. Now, Pāraharaha is a little kāinga not far from the present site of ngā whetū marama o ngā tau o Hinawa, which is, well, the remains of which stand at Miringa Te Kakara. So for those of us who don't know, Google it. You'll see how there's, and if you see any Pākehā discussion on things like, what do we call that? The Temple of Mu and Atlantis, kua mōhio koutou, he tito, he rukahu e rā koro. Miringa Te Kakara was a site, an ancient site of occupation prior to the arrival of the Tainui people on the Tainui Kunu. It was occupied, and it was a place consistently occupied by the Te Tonei Wikainga, a Ngāti Kahu and others, and it was also a place where wānanga were a constant presence, right up until the last one, which is the cross house, Miringa Te Kakara. Ngā whetū mara mō ngā tau o Hinawa. Not looking particularly flash there, fell into disrepair, and we're hearing some of those themes coming through our kōrero today about the disrepair of our houses. Our houses are letters from the past. They speak of who we are, who we might be, who we should be. They provide to us a vast wealth of knowledge that inform us of how to be. So when our houses are in disrepair, we lose our way. Nō reira, he wero kei roto I nei koro e whakatakotohi atu nei kia koto e koro mā e kuima. Now, the remains of the last wānanga are at the place called Miringa Te Kakara. The name of the whare wānanga is not Miringa Te Kakara, as most would believe, but it is Ngā Whetū Mara Mau Ngā Tau o Hinawa. During its building, it was built in the middle of winter, under the stars Hinawa, and it took 2 years to build. And like many of our whare, it was built and constructed on the account of dreams and visions. Now, when Te Kooti came back into the area, as I mentioned before, everyone was worried. They weren't sure what he was there for. Where was this Te Kooti going? What was he doing? We do know that Tāwhiao sent out Wahanui to investigate, and Wahanui, the great chief Wahanui, came back and said to the king, "Wa hara mai a Kooti ki te whakaheke I tā tāua mana. Te Kooti has come to usurp our mana." Tērā kōrero tērā. What does that mean? Not exactly sure. I've got some ideas, but we can talk about that later. So that type of conversation coming back, that type of response set the people on edge. And hence the great hui that was called at Te Kuiti. The great hui that was called at Te Kuiti to discuss the return of Te Kooti. Te Kooti came via Arohena through Ngāti Raukawa and entered into Ngāti Rereahu. Entered in through the southern area of Maniapoto, the greater extent of Maniapoto. He came across the kāinga, which we call Orongo Maipoho, and found it to be empty. It wasn't quite empty. Some of the locals who were still there heard him coming and his people, and they ran and hid themselves. So he went on to Miringa Te Kakara and found much the same. The place was abandoned. Most of the people had gone to Te Kuiti for this great hui. He then moved on to Pāraharaha. And coming across Pāraharaha, found there to be only one person there. Te Rā Karepe, tohunga, one of the lead tohunga of this whare wānanga. Ngā whetū mara mau ngā tau o Hinawa. Te Rā Karepe was leaning up against some rocks, some rather large rocks which formed part of the back wall of the tupuna whare. Leaning there, pipe in hand, the stem of it in his mouth, he sat and watched as Te Kooti and his party of somewhere between 60 and 70 followers rode up onto the marae. Well, Te Kooti rode up onto the marae. He rode on his horse, got down, and waited to be received. He waited a very long time. Te Rā Karepe said nothing. He just sat and looked. 3 days went past, and finally Te Kooti rose to his feet. Koe nei nā kōrero te kai. He rose to his feet and he said to Te Rā Karepea, E koro, kua tā mai ki te tiki te mana, ho miringa te kakara. It was said in such a way that the old man finally replied, stood up, straightened his kākahu, took out his pipe, and in a very direct and strong voice said to Te Kooti, Eki, ihara mai nā koe ki te tiki, te mana o miringa te kakara. I nā koe a te ara ko tō hia, tēnā hara mai ki te tiki. When Piripi and others relayed to me that story, it seemed each time to develop a little bit more life, depending on who was in the room and who was enjoying it. But the words never changed. And the final act, the protruding of the tongue of Te Rā Karepea, was the final act in the telling of that story. They further went on to go, and especially Piripi in the telling, that when that happened, I te rewheke a te Kooti. He leapt to his feet again, and before he could speak, one of his followers by the name of Apanui, and I believe we may have sorted out who this Apanui person is, pulled Te Kooti aside to counsel him and to talk about what was going to happen next. This is what we believe happened. And the place that they sat has been ever since called Te Nohoanga a Te Kooti. I've been there to Pāraharaha. The rocks are still there. Te Nohoanga is still there. I can give you the GPS if you like. Oh, I think we might save that for another conversation. They've been there. Ana kārongo koe, ki te tae koe ki rei, kārongo koe I te wairua. I nā mōhana koe ki ngā kōrero, kārongo koe I te wairua o nā kau mātua ne. These are not gentlemanly discussions. These are hard times. But why miringa te kakara? What was he doing at miringa te kakara? He came therefore, as he said in our dialogue, the mana of miringa te kakara. Te mana o miringa te kakara. Nā mōhiotanga ngā mātauranga o te whare wānanga. Ngā mōhiotanga ngā mātauranga o te whare wānanga o te whare tapu nei ngā whetū mārama o ngā tau o hinawa. In some research I did after that, and in further conversations with Piripi, he dropped a couple of clues, talking about 5 tohunga, well-regarded tohunga of miringa te kakara, before it was built and after it was built, and the movement of 3 of these tohunga. The 2 that stayed home were Te Rā Karepea and Ranga Whenua. There were 3 others. Wharekura, Nerihana, and Taria. These 3 were travellers. They went out to other whare wānanga. They watched as Te Ua Haumene had his spiritual awakening, and they witnessed that. They came back. They stayed with Ranga Whenua and Te Rā Karepea for some time, and then departed for Uawa, for a whare wānanga on the East Cape. I reira ka tipura te whakaro i aha. Ana ka tukunatu taku pātai. Nā koe naura te pātai kia Piripi. Why did they go there? There's a whare wānanga there. Which whare wānanga? I got a whare wānanga in my head thinking, I know there's a whare wānanga there. Is it that one? Te whakaro i hanau kia rāwhiao. And what is the connection to any of the story that I'm telling? According to Piripi, there was a young man, tēnei tangata, who did not complete his training. And so the reason for coming to Miringa Te Kakara, to the whare taonga, the whare tapu, the whare wānanga nei, ngā whetū marama o ngā tau o Hinawa, was to complete his schooling. Tika atu he atu e koroma e kui ma koe nei nā kōrero te kai. I'm trying to match up dates. Say, is this possible? Now, Phil didn't say, Piripi didn't say he went to Rāwhioro, but he said he went to Uawa. He went to they went to the whare wānanga there, and they were there for a very long time. Every chance too, they visited Puangiang and a few other wānanga around the place. Te koira ke te mahi a ngā tohunga e torune. A neri hana, a tariao, a wharekura. I don't think it's been written down anywhere, so e karema, you heard it here. During his time at home, Te Kooti traversed and explored the back blocks of the Rangitoto Ranges, very wary of the opportunistic nature of the Crown, who might catch him within the rohe. Also, very wary of the jealousy of individuals. Very charismatic person was Te Kooti, which we all know that. You can't be great without being charismatic. He also was much adored within different communities within the Rohe Pōtae, and there were women who much adored him as well. E ai ki te kai. I don't know if he adored them, but they adored him. But we all love a good singer. So to this mix came, this is another story too from home that I don't believe anybody. Anybody have a Ngāti Rereahu? Ka pai, nobody. I'll just check Moiahu. Ngāti Pahere? Great. Kawhia? Okay, we're clear to speak. To the mix came Te Kooti. I don't know how many wives or he had. We have rumours, but we do know at home that he had a woman by the name of Teiwa. Teiwa, number 9. And according to ours at home, she was the 9th of his wives. Oh, koe nā noho ke au e mea tura kia kouta herereke tā tēne, herereke tā tēne. And Teiwa was very young, very beautiful, and you have to understand that in Ngāti Maniapoto, unlike the other tribes, we are very handsome people. We are blessed with that. Blessed and cursed. And a young man who would become the namesake of Piripi Ngāwhira Crown, a young man by the name of Ngāwhira, was about. Tall, strong, young, strapping, everything all in its place. An absolutely stunning, unusual, commanding figure of a Ngāti Maniapoto. The two of them quickly came together, Te Whai and Ngāwhira, to the point that rumours were beginning to be spread. Well, they weren't rumours. The two were trying to cohabitate quietly on the side, having a liaison. Ngāwhira and Te Whai decided it was best that they should elope, to run away, which seems to be a pattern of things also in the Ngāti Maniapoto rohe. If you can't get sign-off or agreement for your marriage, then you hit the road. And you make do as you go. And so these two made those plans to run away together. And upon eloping, they were found out. And Ngāwhira was challenged by Te Kooti. Te Kooti being an older man, and Te Whai being much younger. They clashed with Taiaha and were watched. And it became apparent quite soon into their engagement that the younger man would best Te Kooti. I didn't say it, my kaumātua did. And so eventually they broke from their engagement, from their battle. And Ngāwhira and Te Whai moved to leave that patch of earth, that battleground. But before they did, Te Kooti called out and said to Ngāwhira and to Te Whai, e kore ko ua, e mori mori mokopuna. Now, the debate at home was, what was that? What was the meaning of that? Was it a poropititanga, a prophecy or something else? And the reason for bringing the story up is just wanting to share some of those kōrero that we have from home, that despite the visitations with the Spirit, he was still a man. He was still a man. So Te Kooti moved around our rohe. I do believe he came all the way down to Kakepuku at different times. Who wouldn't? It's a lovely place to be in the northern part of the King Country. But he wandered many a day up in the hills and back country of the Rangitoto Ranges. Spent many a day, I believe, and time with Ngāti Whakatere, who lived up in those places. Ngāti Whakatere being from Bulls. Where's that fella gone? Our pie man's going to look for a pie. Bulls, but stretching out further to those people between Bulls and Palmerston North, those Ngāti Whakateres who migrated south. He was well known at home for appearing and disappearing. Angi mā minga. Angi mā minga te haere o Te Kooti. He was there, he was gone. They would move off to a hui and he'd be there before they got there. He'd wave them goodbye and on to the next hui, he'd be there. And so lots of stories, there was a lot of wonderment around Te Kooti as a man and his doings as a prophet and as a matakite. When I look at his life as a prophet, like all prophets, it began with hardship, often sickness, often on the point of death, even to the point of almost madness in dealing with all of the things that they had to deal with, the stresses of their lives. And it's at that point that the revelations happen, at the worst time. And to the worst places, people like Te Kooti come. Not to make everything nice and keep it the same, but to change it, to change up our world, to break us out of things that we've been doing for far too long that mightn't actually be any good for us. To bring about change. He was an iconoclast, person who breaks idols, who breaks down what was before and brings in and enables a new beginning. Te hinganga o tētahi tō tarakaita I roti I te wao. Kāhinga, kātakota, we taukiri. But if there's a silver lining to that, a great disaster, is that it rents open and allows for light to come through. Ana koina tētahi mei kōrero nui tiana e ngā koroheke, e ngā ruruhi o te kāinga. O te māramatanga I mauria mai ai, e ia. And thinking now of my grandmother who's 89, she remembers as a child the last families who held to the ringatu faith in Kakaipuku, the Kupe family, and all of their doings. And when we go back to Te Kuiti, to Te Tokanga Nui Aloho, to that great gift from Te Kooti to the people of Ngāti Maniapoto, to its chiefs, I'm also conscious that the voice of Te Kooti is quite silent in the house. As the faith goes forward, as you look to reconstruct, develop, explore and regrow, be it through a school, and I might say at this stage that any people, any group, and iwi without its own whare wānanga, without its own whare kura, its own school, without that great plan, without an institution that affirms the identity of its people, without that, we are destined to die. So encouraged by the conversations by the two earlier speakers, the first speakers of the morning, with that notion of creating a way forward, of ensuring that the letters from our tupuna, those whare, those grounds, as pōharu as they are, might be resurrected, renewed, and go forward. Because Te Kooti did exactly that. He renewed, he restored, he broke new ground, he challenged. Te Kooti tohe tohe. Ko rā te teho nā kupu I te kai. Ana ko Te Kooti tohe tohe. Because he was not argumentative, but strong-willed. And so it's going to take strong will to come back. It's going to take even stronger will to become bigger, stronger, better. So kia kahara ko tau e te iwi. Anything good for us is good for us. Now, we know that in 1883, Te Kooti was formally pardoned. At Rewi Manga Maniapoto's insistence in his dealings, in their dealings with the Crown. On the 12th of February, he and Rewi met the native minister, John Bryce, at Mangaorongo, just outside of Otorohanga. Pledges of peace were exchanged. This pardon came at a price. The price paid is the main trunk line that crossed directly through the heart of the King Country, essentially opening it up for exploration and abuse by the Crown and others. But that was the price that those rangatira of home were willing to pay to ensure that Te Kooti was pardoned. Now, those agreements happened 3 years later, 2 or 3 years later, that allowed for the train to go through. But they were negotiated much earlier. To this Te Kooti, or before this even happened, Te Kooti at Tokanga Motu prophesied that he would return in the form of Te Atua Whiowhio. Te Atua Whiowhio tangi ana mairunga tangi ana mairaro. Nā ro tonu mai ko te reo o Te Kooti. Te Atua Whiowhio, the train, the steam train. Toot, toot. He further went on to explain in his prophecy too that it would have one eye, and that eye itself would be the eye of Te Kooti. Wene nā kōrero te kāinga. I don't know, e kōrero kēhu e aharani. Engari me ana ratu wene nā poropititanga. And that the house that he would leave to Ngāti Maniapoto would be as a stone, would be as a rock upon which ngā manu o Te Motu would find a place to settle when all the land all about huri had disappeared. That te toko nganui anoho, toko nganui anoho would become that place. And today, it pretty much is that place for Ngāti Maniapoto. It is the mainstay marae, the prime marae, the most important of marae. You know, as a Ngāti Unu, I'm sitting thinking, but my house is important too. But in truth, te tokanga nui anoho, the gift of Te Kooti to the chiefs of Ngāti Maniapoto, of Ngāti Rōra and those hapu, is the mainstay, primary marae of Ngāti Maniapoto and the Ngāti Rereahu people. Koe nā te aroha o Te Kooti, Kamata. And what for? I suppose, and others have said it, that it was reciprocity for Ngāti Maniapoto giving shelter to Te Kooti for many years, over a decade. And it was over 7 years that Te Kooti spent time taking his lessons at Miringa Te Kakara, alongside Te Rā Karepe, Ranga Whenua, and others. So Te Atua Karutahi travels through our district at least once a month. We see the restoration of the steam train, and every time it comes past Tokanga Nui Anoho, they blow the whistle. They don't know what they're doing, but thank God. It's a voice that we all smile at and smile for on the inside and on the out. For those of us who know, ko hoku mai te matua tangata. Ko hoku mai te matua tangata. Oh, i taiho. Anyway, Maisie's done an amazing thing of singing a song. But I pulled together our presentation in about an hour and a half between tangi at home and between work. Ka tai e tau mai rā te tahi, wairua ahara ni kia. And I've got my band here to help me sing. Tēnei te waiata I tau mai I au I te tuhituhi, I te whakakauhia mai rai aku whakaro, o te matua tangata. Yeah. I hope that it's just those small things I wanted to share with all of you. Small things. There's much to do. There's much to do. But whakaronga rua kau ana māwoko taringa. You know, twice heard are the rumours of the coming of Te Kooti. And I thought about Piripi and the others, when they tell these stories, you can't tell when it happened. It was like it was yesterday. Wera te āhua te whakatako kōrero mai, orator, ngā pēpere koua te kāinga. Wana maua ko taringa ki te haumai o te kōrero, e ko te Kooti e haere mai ana, ahaha. E te iwi o Maniapoto me aha me mau hune, mau taone, mau patune. O he tu kau ana te ngā kau e. O rongo mai poho tangata kore toko to mō wai roki roki, mō wai roki roki. Tahi kei pāraha raha ko te rā, he puri, he kara wānanga, ahaha. Tau mai e Kooti ki te mana o miringa te kakara, kei te ārero e whetero atu nei e. Nau mai e Kooti e mahi nei ko e te mawherangi no wakiru ngā orangi toto, runga o rangi nui, ahaha. Tangi ana mai runga, tangi ana mai raro. Atua fio fio nā roto ana mai koto reo e tangi mai nei. Whakamoe mititia, whakamoe mititia, te atua I tōna wā, he tapo. Ko te Whai o te Motu, ko te Kooti taku taku, ko te Kooti roreka, ko te Kooti angi maminga, ko te Kooti tohe tohe, ko te Kooti whakararinga pono, e koko ia, e ara e te matua tangata. Hon, koe nei te whakakapinga o ngenei kore. Hoi no rā, e koro mā, e kui mā, ngā mana nā tapu. Koe nei nā kōrero I rāngona, e tehi o nā kōrero. Ngā kōrero moro iti, kai roto tonu I te whatumano e takotoa. Tēnei te mau mai ki tō tātou hui, nā wāhanga o te kōrero e pai tiane e koutou haria. Nā wāhanga kāre pai te pai kia koutou waiho. I nā he pātai a koutou maroto I te wāpea ka whai wāhi tātou anō ki te kōrero rero. No reira huri no, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.